Yep.
End.
Living and learning Torah. So, lilmod ulelamed. Just want you to sit for a second with the mouthful of lilmod ulelamed. Those are the imperative or the infinitives, like to a verb, to blank, right? Lilmod is to learn. Lelamed is to teach. And the way Hebrew works, it's actually a causative, meaning that whole structure of a verb, lelamed, whenever you hear in Hebrew something with those, right, it means to cause. So literally it takes the shoresh, the root of learn, lomed, right, and makes it into to cause to learn. And when you cause someone to learn, the simple word for that in English is to teach, right? They're closely related. And another that's closely related, especially in our prayers, is la'asot, to do. So we are living and learning Torah, and learning comes with teaching. So the way in B mitzvah circles, for particularly people between age 12 and a half and 13.1, right, is through the Devar Torah, which is where you become a teacher of Torah, having learned it yourself well enough to teach it. And second, through a Tikkun Olam project of some sort, making the world a better place where we roll up our sleeves and do the work, living and learning Torah. So we're going to start by thinking about our Torah portions. And then we're going to go to the living Torah. What are the values and what are the projects that we can do to make the values sing? And then we're going to come back at the very end to talking about Dvar Torah and how to actually like write it and make it sing. We are joined by Zev and Yay, you be like next up. And there's Alana, I'm not sure, or Iana, or I don't know, but if that person who just joined could unmute or self-identify, that would be awesome. And yes, you are authorized to eat during this. Absolutely. Okay. Cool. All right, so we're going to go around and I'm going to ask you to unmute and share. I'm going to ask each kid who's on tonight to introduce yourself and any parental units nearby, and to tell us where you go to school and when your B mitzvah is, the date, and also, if known, the Torah portion. Ready? Have at it. Okay. Let's see. Zev, I think you're earliest of this crew, so take it.
I go to Sims. My name is Zev. I go to Silver Spring International Middle School. And my B mitzvah is January 29th. And all right. And my Torah portion is Parshat Mishpatim.
All right. In one sentence, can you tell us what's Mishpatim?
Mishpatim is the laws about after the Ten Commandments that explains or adds on to the Ten Commandments.
A whole bunch of laws in the middle of Exodus, and it's kind of the turning point from the narrative of getting out of Egypt and to Sinai, and then right after that, we start going into the details of tabernacle and stuff, which some of you are stuck with. I mean, have the incredible opportunity to get to learn and chant. Okay, awesome, thank you. Toby.
My name is Toby. I go to Lowell.
As loud, a little louder or closer to the mic. Thanks.
My name is Toby. I go to Lowell School, And my bar mitzvah is on May 7th. And I don't know the name of the portion.
I should be able to remind you. I'll look it up. Matt, do you recall offhand?
I don't.
Okay. We'll get you hooked up shortly. You can ask the cat behind you. Might, no. All right. And I realize I'm out of date also. That was, I was skipping ahead there. So, oh, Alana, that makes so much more sense than Lana. Excellent. Hi there. Okay. You're like right after Toby, I think, right? So go ahead, unmute.
So I'm Alana.
I can, yeah, barely see you, barely hear you, and can't see you. That may be intentional, but if you can wave.
I'm Alana. My bat mitzvah is on May 14th, and I don't know what parsha.
Okay. Well, people who have their B mitzvah not for months away are, you're not exempt exactly, but it's okay. You've got time to work on it, right? Whereas like Zev, it's around the corner, right? Okay. I'm going to go back in time, and Lila and Noah, y'all a bit earlier.
Mom, you okay? Hi, I'm Lila, and my name is Noah. We go to Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School in Rockville, and our parsha is Bechukotai, and our B'nai Mitzvah is May 21st. And Bechukotai is mostly about vows and promises, and a little bit about the rules of how much everything's worth for sacrifices.
Excellent.
And mom's here too.
And Mom's here too.
Mom's here too.
Oh yeah, we haven't been doing great with introducing the parental units, but cool. All right, excellent. So thank you, Lila. Do you want to add anything? It's fine. Okay, so Bechukotai is the very, very end of Leviticus, which means working backwards. Alana, you are Bahar, which is Leviticus chapter 25. And Toby, you are the one before that, which I think is Emor. Does that sound familiar? Emor? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So you three are the late Leviticus crowd. Excellent. All right. Jonah.
My name is Jonah. I go to Alisteel Middle School. My tour parsha is Bahat Aleoteka, and it's about like Miriam getting leprosy because she was gossiping about Moses's wife, and then yeah, that's most of it.
That
And
is
also
one
my
of
mom's here.
what's up?
My mom's also here, so
Yay. Hi, Jocelyn.
Hello.
Yay. Excellent. Cool. So yes, Baha'alotecha is in the middle of Numbers, and it's got a bunch of interesting things in it, one of which is the Miriam leprosy thing. Another is meat eaters being killed because they want meat and are complaining. And as a radical vegetarian, I love that part. So there's some really interesting stuff there. But the Torah, it's one of those things like you got to dig. In fact, I'll tell a Baha'alotcha story when we wrap up the go around. But Rosie, please.
I'm Rosie. I go to Eastern Middle School, and my bat mitzvah is on June 18th, and I don't remember the parsha.
Do you want to introduce me?
No.
Can Abby or Josh, your parents, possibly fill in?
I'm Rosie's mom, but I don't know. And Josh is on the other coast. Maybe he knows.
Hi, I know. I'll look it up. I'll get it in a minute.
All right, cool. We've got all this info too. Just want to make sure you know it. I like to joke from the old days, like, a generation before your parents. It was like, imagine you're on Miami Beach with a bunch of other old Jews and you say, so Nu, what was your parsha at your bas mitzvah, right? Like, people don't talk like that a whole lot anymore, but it's like good to know, because each Shabbat is different because of the chunk of Torah being read. And that usually goes by the name of that Torah portion. So that gives that Shabbat its special identity. So the reminder before, this is like bookends, right? Talk a little bit about the Torah, and then we're going to move on to Jewish values, and then we're just going to come back to the Torah at the tail end. The reminder for the Devar Torah, and for just thinking about the Torah portion, every word anywhere in that Torah portion is yours, right? It's yours to play with, it's yours to argue with, it's yours to interpret, and any little thing or big thing anywhere in there that interests you could be the hook that becomes the basis of a Dvar Torah, where you start writing and you talk about it and you tell people what you think. And some of you have begun that process, and some of you, it's still early, and that's totally cool. But it starts by, the first assignment is essentially read the entire Torah portion in English. Alana has the easiest because it's one of the shortest Torah portions. It's only one chapter, like 50 sentences is the whole Torah portion, right? More commonly, it's 3 to 5 chapters, but it's not long. And as Jews, we read the Torah through the eyes of everyone before us who read the Torah. And that's why you have that Chumash in front of you. So when you read it, you can read in the English. And if you know enough or want to ask around, you can make reference to the Hebrew. That's going to help, add new insight. But on the same page, there's line by line commentary, where when something really interesting pops up, or that our ancients found interesting, then the editors of the Chumash pop it in there. And then you flip back a page or two, and there are essays on some of the big themes in the Torah portion that will go in much more detail on, like, the backstory, right? And then there's this wonderful section called Gleanings that has little short quotes from around the world, some of it from scholars and some of it from other religious traditions that kind of shed even more light, right? So the goal is to just understand what the ancients said and meant by it. But as you read it, your job is to make notes, maybe even literally keep a list, chapter and verse, of the things that pop out at you as interesting. And any one of those you could then amplify and make into a thing. So here's my true confession story from 38 years ago, Lord have mercy, in Toledo, Ohio, when I was 13. And my Torah portion was the same as Jonah's. It was Baha'alotcha in the book of Numbers. And I only came back to it in my late 20s and went, wow, that's a really interesting Torah portion. Why the beep did no one tell me or even ask me to go look at it and figure out what it meant? This was a Reformed temple in the 1980s. It was not very like roll up your sleeves and engage. It's kind of a miracle that I became a rabbi at all. But like I was literally given index cards with a canned speech that I was expected to recite, right? We've come a long way from there. I was also given a cassette tape to just memorize a bunch of sounds without ever learning the trope or learning what the Hebrew meant. Again, we've come a long way. But I only found out later that Baha'alotcha has this cool thing about Miriam and leprosy, which becomes the basis of thinking like, how important it is not to go about slandering people. But there's an angle there about race, because the thing she's talking about is Moses's wife, who's from Africa. And that becomes like, whoa, we weren't thinking about that. And there's a gender thing, because Miriam and her brother Aaron both are murmuring, but only Miriam gets punished. Why always the woman, right? Those important questions like gender and race totally not on the radar screen back then, totally on the radar screen now. We need to ask tough questions of the text. What I also didn't know, that was the very first year I was becoming vegetarian, was this amazing story where the people, in their ultimate symbol of like kvetching, that's a good Yiddish word, to kvetch, it's like to just complain, right? It's like a kvetcher is no fun to be around. This isn't good, that isn't good, I don't like this, why did you do it that way, right? And so the ultimate kvetch, the Israelites are kvetching, right? God just, according to the narrative, just took them out from slavery into freedom. They're walking around in the middle of the desert and they have water and food. The food is in the form of manna, which supposedly tasted like anything, right? But they're getting sick of it. And they say, we want meat. And specifically, they remember that as bad as slavery was, sometimes they got to eat meat back in Egypt. And they're literally saying, better to be a slave who gets to have steak than a free person who eats tofu, right? Kind of amazing. And God is, I think pretty righteously, according to the story, so furious and so fed up with these complaining Israelites that God sends a massive plague and thousands of people die because they complained about wanting meat. But there's even better, because the final part says, so then the plague keeps going, and now the leaders are having to think, what do we do? How do we stop the plague? Like, God is now so angry that God's going to destroy us all. What do we have to do? So they sent the 70 elders of Israel out into the camp with incense to go and prophesy, to like be prophets and spew whatever they could, holy language, and try to get the people back into equilibrium with God so the plague would end. So they go out, they do this, and the plague ends. And only 12,000 or so people die, right? Nothing compared to COVID, but still quite a high body count for God's anger, right? And then 68 of the 70 finish their work and they go back. But these two guys, Eldad and Medad, we never hear of them before or since, but they are like the ultimate heroes. Eldad and Medad, out of the 70, keep going. They keep prophesying. And I'm tempted to just send you all to Numbers chapters 11 and 12 and read it for yourself. But you know, I'll finish the story. It's worth following up. Again, Numbers 11 and 12 roughly. But there's this wonderful, almost Godfather-like scene at the end where Joshua, who is the aide-de-camp to Moses, kind of like Hamilton is to Washington in Act 1 of Hamilton, right? Like the assistant. So he's got the intel. He knows what's going on in the camp, and he goes up to Moses. He's like, boss, we got a problem. There's these two guys, Eldad and Medad, and they're still prophesying. What do you say I take care of them for you? You know what I mean? Right? Like literally, Joshua's like, what do we do? How can we end this threat of people prophesying, sharing what they understood as divine truth directly to the people? And Moses, who could have been totally threatened for his leadership, could have very easily said, thank you, Joshua, I had no idea. Off with them. And instead, Moses responds in one beautiful line. Would that all of our people were prophets. Like, instead of shutting them up, why don't we encourage everyone else to get up and start being a prophet? Which is the perfect segue into part 2, living Torah. So first, any questions or arguments? Raise your hand or raise your virtual hand or unmute and speak. Or not. Josh on the West Coast.
What happened to those, to Eldad, and we didn't hear anything more about him after that? It was just keep on prophesying and that's it?
That's where the story ends. So the Midrash, right? You get to write your own story. What do you think happened, right? The story is retained. So there are certainly some people who still look at it and say, ooh, threat to leadership, and others who look at it and say, ooh, opportunity, we should all be prophets. Yeah, but that's the beauty of Torah. You get to interpret it as you see fit. Great question, thank you. Zev.
This isn't a question, it's a comment, but I just wanted to say that Sylvan and Caden were debating about Eldad and Medad when they
Indeed.
did their, I don't know what it's called, but when they did their Dvar.
Yes.
But
yay. So yes, some of you know Zev's older brother Sylvan and first cousin Caden, and they became Bar Mitzvah together a couple years ago and did this wonderful Devar Torah that was framed as an argument because this was their Torah portion, and they argued over exactly this question. Thank you. In fact, you know what? I'm gonna put you and Jonah Bramble in touch. If you still have a copy of their Dvar Torah that you could share, that would be really awesome. In fact, you know what? I think I didn't BCC when I sent everyone a message just like 1 minute to 7. So if you want to reply to all, you know, like then you all get to follow up on Eldad and Medad through the lens of a couple of really wise 13-year-olds a couple years ago. Awesome. Thank you. Good reminder. All right. So I am going to screen share the document that I just sent as an attachment. The main event here is we are going to spend some time, like 10 minutes on our own with a list of Jewish values, because ultimately that's what it's all about. But there's an intro to that and a follow-up, and the follow-up is going to include a Devar Torah project. Is everyone seeing Tikkun Olam, theory and tachlis? Yes? Excellent. Okay. So tachlis, by the way, tachlit, Hebrew or Yiddish word that means like practical, right? The opposite of theory. So theory, we learn why we do this, and tachlis is how. Okay. So lots of blessings, having already introduced ourselves. So the first one is to study Torah, and here it is in the Hebrew and in the English. So read it with me, please. Follow along. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ruach haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And then my friend, Rabbi Jeremy Schwartz at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College found an old text that talked about meeting the needs of the community and turned that phrase into another blessing that you can, sort of a modern blessing that you can optionally say when you go to do things for the community, like Tikkun Olam or committee meetings, or right? And that is la'asok betzarchei tzibur. So instead of la'asok, to engage with b'divrei Torah, words or concepts of Torah, betzarchei tzibur is engaging with the needs of the community. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ruach haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok betzarchei tzibur. And then finally, another modern one is just the opening 6 words. Blessed are you, eternal God, Spirit of the universe, shenatan lanu hizdamnut, who has given us the opportunity letaken et ha'olam, to repair the world. And this is a song that some of you may know, written by Dan Nichols, a Reform Jewish song leader who I was actually in a summer camp cabin with at age 11, and popular at Camp Havaya and elsewhere. So if you know it, please sing and clap along. The opening words are, as you can see on the screen share, na, 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 na. You got that? Na, 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 na. Na, 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 na. Na, 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 na. Na, 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 na. Baruch, to that same melody. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ruach haolam. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ruach haolam. Shenatan lanu hizdamnut letaken et haolam. Na 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 na. All right, Isaac Luria. This guy lived in the 1570s at the end of his life in northern Israel, in Sfat, the famous mystical city. And he, living a couple generations after the Jews were expelled from Spain and massacred in Portugal, and it was a really bad scene. And these are all like the grandchildren of the survivors, and they are exiles. They thought they had a nice, stable home in a modern, enlightened Western country, but then the wrong leaders took over, and it got really bad for minorities. Just saying. Not that that, is ever a threat in, modern Western democracies. So, they're bringing this consciousness of this really broken world where they're really vulnerable and they're all in exile. And they're faced with a philosophical question too. If God is everywhere and everything, where is there room for evil? How is it possible that God, Yotzer et Hakol, created everything, and yet there's all this evil out there? So the answer that Isaac Luria comes up with is that originally God was everything everywhere. There was nothing but God. And so the first thing God had to do in deciding to create was to create some space where there wasn't God. So imagine infinity on an X, a Y, and a Z axis, right? A 3D cube that is infinite. And then imagine that in the middle, a smaller cube or sphere in the middle suddenly gets hollowed out, right? So imagine like a box, right, of infinite size, but in the middle is a space that is like open, and around it is solid. So the solid that's out there everywhere in every direction is God, but there's this space. And in this space, according to Isaac Luria, God sets up finite vessels, like clay, earthen vessels, and pours God energy, God juice, 100% concentrated divinity into those bowls. And it wasn't really a great idea because God apparently had not read a physics textbook and didn't realize that when you try to pour infinite energy into finite vessels, the vessels are going to break. They're like balloons. You blow it up, it gets bigger, 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 and then it pops, right? So they pop. These kelim, or vessels, explode. Shvirata kelim, they break. And in that space, which is the known universe, with God in every direction infinitely, there's all this empty space. And there's broken bits of earth, of matter, right? That's the physical matter. And there's this empty space where there's room for bad choices to be made and random things to happen and evil to take root. But there's also sparks of God that are scattered from that explosion all over. And there's even, that's like called the reshimu, the residue of God. So here we are. This is like a cosmology to try to explain how the world came to be. It's every bit as good as the Big Bang. And it's actually very similar to what modern physicists tell us happened at the Big Bang. you can make the analogy. So we've got these sparks of God hidden in ordinary matter, and our goal is to lift them up. It's like the world is balanced between the sacred and the ordinary. And if we have too much ordinary and some of it's evil, it's not going to go well. But if we can lift up enough of the sacred, it's going to be awesome. And that is where we get the idea of Tikkun Olam, which is literally repair the world by doing mitzvot, doing good things, and lifting up those sparks and letting them glow and reuniting God with God. It's a big, heavy concept. But when we talk about Tikkun Olam, we're talking about making the world a better place. But in the background, we're actually talking about like saving the universe from this core exile, right? You know, it's like we are all Avengers in a Marvel series, right? Like there's incredible consequences to the choices that we make. And in microcosm, there really is, because we can make or break someone's day with a word or a smile. We can make a difference that could even save a life with a donation of tzedakah, or rolling up our sleeves and doing important work, like feeding the hungry or ending climate change, right? Those are pretty big stakes. And while none of us are responsible solely, we all have to do our part. So with that, Jewish values. Not all the Jewish values are literally mitzvot, commandments, and not all of core Jewish values are all about Tikkun Olam. In fact, Tikkun Olam is a value that's on this list along with about 50 others. This is a pretty overwhelming thing, but this here website, which I am going to copy, and it went away. I didn't mean to do that. Sorry about that. That's what came up. Hold on. Where was it? Sorry. Hold on a second. I'm going to copy this in the chat because your assignment for the next few minutes is to scan this article by Rabbi David Deutsch, who's a leader of the Reconstructionist movement, who kind of took modern liberal Jewish values and made a list, a master list of some of the key ones. Here it is, the URL. You can click on it and fill your screen. And in a minute, I'll try to screen share. I have like all of these as a list from a Jewish values class that I taught at the beginning of the pandemic, so that if you don't want to have to scroll through. Now, you will not have time to read all of this, but there's a good short little explanation next to each of these 50 or so. And again, it's kind of overwhelming. This is just a first pass. I'm going to ask you all to work on this on your own with a parent, because this is Jewish values. This is what we're doing and why we're doing it. You have to register to access that URL? Really? Did anyone else click on it and just get a document? Anyone?
Yeah, it opened up for me.
You got the document? Try again.
It worked for us too.
I've got it
Okay.
too. Not a problem.
Okay, great. Sorry about that, Zev. Okay, you got it. All right. So again, overwhelming. All I'm going to ask is not necessarily your absolute top, but as you're scanning, and if you've got a pad of, like a pencil somewhere, yay, you can write them down and just take note of a few of your top values without thinking too much, without reading every word. Just scan all these choices, and there's a lot of good, compelling ones, but what you think might be most important, and you get to decide what that means, most important. All right, so go ahead, stop looking at me, but again, I'm going to pull up a screen share shortly, I hope. But you've got the article, start scrolling, start looking at Jewish values and making a mental note of like your top 3, parents and kids both. Okay, have at it, enjoy.
Wait, so we scan the thing and then what do we do?
By scan, I mean like just sort of as you're reading, like, okay, ahava, love, emet, truth, right? Like, I get it. These are all really good. And then like, all right, if I had to pick out of this overwhelming, awesome list of these great Jewish values, what are like 3 or 4 top values? Boom. Found it.
Can we put 4?
Yeah, I will let you have 4. You can even have 5. But don't tell anyone. Here we go. Screen share. Okay. This will be small if you're on a tablet, but here they are, just the headlines. So for reference, we're going to go about 4 more minutes, roughly. And when you're done, if you've gotten through them all and have like your top 3 or 4, just give a shout out or even just put in the chat, done. In fact, better yet, put your top 3 or 4 in the chat. One more minute. Is that crazy? Too little? Can't see faces. Are we close to wrapping up? Right. If you're still going, keep going. If not, I'll just explain that a group of us went through this in the first 6 months of the pandemic. So the colors change based on like how far we got in each session. And the one on Earth Day, I highlighted in green the sort of eco ones, and the one on that fell over Juneteenth, all the ones that had top implications around racial justice. Right, so there's like, a lot of information in this version, but the headings are the same from the David Deutsch article. And you can see at the top that we did this, we voted in light of the early pandemic, what were some of the values that we needed the most of? And so think about where we were early in COVID, and you can decide for yourself, but the group came up at that time with, this is the very top left, with emet, which is truth, anava, humility, which includes like knowing the limits of what you know, chesed, loving kindness and relationship, haganat hateva, taking care of nature, shmirat haguf, which literally means protecting your body, which relates to the famous Jewish law of pikuach nefesh, saving lives, kind of imperative, savlanut, which is patience, and Tikkun Olam. Okay, with that, stop the screen share, and I'm looking at the chat. All right, so among some of our top choices so far, thank you, we've got love or ahava, democracy, Tikkun Olam, diversity and inclusion. Lovely. We've got don't waste time, bitul zman, and Tselem Elohim, that we're all created in the image of God, plus ahava, love, and shalom bayit, peace in the home. Awesome. We got love, truth, charity, and social justice, ahava, emet, tzedakah, and tikkun olam, and a similar list across the generations: love, peace at home, service, avodah, and humility, anava. Right on. Social justice, tikkun olam, menschlichkeit, being a good person, inclusion, and emet, truth. And we've got haganat hateva, environmentalism, egalitarianism, service, avodah, right on. Beautiful lists. All right, any quick comments on the exercise, or how hard it was to pick top ones, or how similar or different it might have been across the generations? Anyone, anyone? So the reminder is, first of all, that this list is worth revisiting and spending more time with. And if there is a parent who wasn't on today's call, this is a good thing to kind of have family dialogue around. But when you spend longer, it's really interesting to ask the expectations, like unpack the question. What does it mean? What's most important? You mean what is favorite for me? What do I think America needs the most right now? What do I think the world needs most? What do I think my parent thinks? What do I think my rabbis think? What do I think my best friend thinks? Right? And like just asking to understand how all these can be important, and we're each going to prioritize them differently. That alone is a worthwhile line of inquiry. So I bless you with continuing to grapple with this question, but above all, with remembering that way more important ultimately than the one or two values or themes that might be in the lines of Torah that you are reading on your big day, this list is where it's at. This list is what it means to be a Jew in the 21st century, right? This is a distillation of some of the top values from our tradition applied to today. This is what it means to be an adult Jew. And when I ask you, put you on the hot seat in those one-on-ones that I've had with some of you and not yet with others of you, and I ask you what this whole thing means, becoming Bi Mitzvah, becoming child of commandment, like that's heavy, that's big. And this list, more than any other single document I can share with you, is where it's at. All right, back to screen share for the tachlis. Very quickly. Here we go. All right, so Tikkun Olam projects. If you actually have time, a good thing to do is think of a bunch of projects using the list we just looked at. Like pick a theme, a value, and then think about what you can do at age 12 or 13 in the DMV in 2021, 2022, with X number of hours, right? In other words, this is not the end all be all. This is not the only Tikkun Olam project you will ever do. In fact, quite the opposite. It's meant to be the smallest Tikkun Olam project out of all of the many that you will yet do. Because every year as you grow and you get smarter and more independent and you have more opportunity, you should be doing more to save the world, right? This is just like an early taste of it. And then we recognize, especially in the COVID era, there's extra limitations on it. We do not expect you to have saved the world by your Bi Mitzvah date. We will call you up to the Torah, even if the world is still broken, despite your best efforts in the weeks and months ahead. But just to kind of think about what you can do. So the blank, like 1 through 10, is like fill in the blanks. You're not going to do them all, but just think big. And then criteria. What might it actually look like? And so this document is with you. We're not going to spend time on it, but some of the things that make for a good Tikkun Olam project, some of the sort of criteria that include that it stretches the comfort zone and it builds capacity, right? And keep those things in mind, especially the last one. It's only the beginning, right? This is momentous momentum toward a life of mitzvot. That's why we do a Tikkun Olam project. And then some examples. So I hope there's more opportunity. We are a cohort. We're all in this one together, and we can exchange ideas amongst ourselves and brainstorm, and that will all be good. So if you already have one, feel free to put it in the chat. If you have a friend or a sibling who did one that you think is a good example, can put a quick description in the chat. We can populate that. Keep thinking about the projects while we wrap this up and then go to the wrap up of the whole thing. Okay, so at the bottom of this is a famous line from Rabbi Hillel over 2,000 years ago, which is a song that some of you may know, but it's one of the great Jewish quotes. It's 3 rhetorical questions, and putting them next to each other is key. Im ein ani li, if I am not for myself, if I don't stand up and do what I need for myself or my group, mi li, who is going to do that? Implication, I have to start with and stand for me and my group. Which an or v can be and or but. It's a great conjunction because and but, when you think about it, sometimes you don't know which one to use. Like I'm gonna say, yeah, And the next thing is related, but a bit different or a bit opposite. So it's an and a but together. In Hebrew, just that's all. The letter Vav and but, she'ani la'atzmi, when I am just for myself, ma'ani, what am I? Notice the stakes are even higher here. So you start with yourself, but you're not even human. It's not who am I this time, it's what am I if I only stay focused on myself or my group. Ve'im lo achshav im hatai, and if not now, when? So go do it. Get off your duff and save the world, right? Take your little step toward saving the world. So with that in mind, there's these spectra to think about. Where do you put yourself in terms of your best energies? Most of your donations for Tikkun Olam, for tzedakah, right? Do you start with yourself, your family, your immediates? Or do you think about your friends and the locals, the broader community, your larger nation or your people? Do you think about all of humanity? Do you think about all the world? They're all important, but where do you put your best energies? On the Jewish, particularism versus universalism, right? Like, are you focused on your particular group or on the everybody and everything? So do you start with like the Jews you know, or the Marylanders or DCers that you know, right? Or do you go to the people nearby, even if you don't know them? Do you go to all the people who you might kind of like? Do you drop the last part and say, I'm going to help people no matter what? Or do you go beyond people and think ecosystems and animals and like, I'm going to protect all of life? I hope you care about all of those, but figuring out where you put your best energies, right? And then how? Do you focus more on helping individuals at one end or changing systems at the other? They're both activism. They're both necessary to help make a difference. And I'm just going to call out Rosie's dad, who's with us from the West Coast, probably on a Mazon trip, right? He represents this national Jewish coalition to feed hungry people in Washington. So a lot of the money that Mazon raises, and Mazon.org is as good a tzedakah recipient as you're going to find, a lot of the money they raise goes directly to food pantries and kitchens, preferably the ones that also have a larger community orientation and an activist orientation. But it's really important to feed hungry people right now. It's also really important to walk the halls of Congress and try to get Congress people to vote for packages that are going to adequately fund social services so that fewer people are hungry in the first place, and so that our society as a whole becomes more compassionate, right? So you can do both. And the question of how you allocate your time and energy is the last line on this sheet. So this is already in your inbox, sent at 6:59. Have fun with it and keep thinking about Jewish values. Okay, take a deep breath. Home stretch, Devar Torah. My little bias is that as good as it is to learn Torah trope and how to lead parts of the service, and bonus for the Haftarah too, with a different trope, right? Ultimately, what matters the most is your original ideas, your contribution to the community and to the stock of knowledge out there. And the Dvar Torah is where you get to be creative. So there aren't that many rules, right? It's relevant to somehow the Torah portion, the Haftarah, something happening that Shabbat, but it's not a book report, right? So it's not what I learned about parsha, whatever, right? But it's also not just talking about basketball or superheroes or whatever you might want to, be thinking about. The idea is you make a connection between something in the text and something today. And I'll end with an analogy that may help bring that home. But that's why the first assignment is read the entire Torah portion in English with those margin notes. Take notes on what's interesting. And any one of those could be your hook. And sometimes the hook is a really small detail, like word choice. You may not even notice it, but when you read the commentary, you see, oh, Rashi in the year 1100 made this comment and noted that that's an unusual word choice. Why this and not that? And when you stop to think about the implications of that teeny little thing, suddenly there's all these values, right? That's like a microscope version. There's also a telescope version where you take a massive concept and try to bring it into better view, but you're not looking at details. You're looking at the big picture, right? What is the theme of this whole Torah portion? What is God? What is ethics? What is love? What is relationship, right? So you can go straight to the big thing using a hook, or you can focus on a small thing that has big implications using that hook. Either way, you need the hook. So you need to know what's in the Torah portion or the Haftarah, and then you develop the idea, right? And there's in the packet that was the email that was sent a few days ago from Sarah Herman, one of the downloads is a one-pager that's also in our B Mitzvah guidelines that we gave you years ago, but don't worry about it, about a Devar Torah, kind of rough format ideas. Lengthwise, it's like an op-ed. It's about 800 words, give or take, right? Not too long, not too short. We're not going to kill you if it's 850 words. If it's 900, you know, Rabbi Rachel and I will talk amongst ourselves and decide if you survive. But yeah, but the point is, you've got a rough sense of it's long enough to develop an idea well with multiple examples and some caveats and put some texture and some personal anecdote in there, but short enough that it's not an overwhelming assignment. That's the goal. And format, it can be anything. It can be an argument, right? Like Zeb's brother and cousin did. It can be a play, a one-act play. It can be a poem, like Moria Leah did a few weeks ago. It can be revolving around an artwork. It can involve music. You can play an instrument. You can, like unpack in words why you chose that, but like the art or the music could be part of the main thing. There are lots of formats that you can use. Ultimately, we want this to be a totally creative enterprise. And you have a lot of resources. You have me. Before or after her time in Israel, you've got Rabbi Rachel, you've got your tutor, you've got your parent or parents, you've got lots of people that you can kind of brainstorm this with. And in subsequent meetings, I'll be working with each of you on the Dvar Torah itself. But you've got to now the beginning of a sense of after you've learned all this stuff, you're going to turn around and teach it. And I bet you've had good teachers. Unfortunately, I'll bet you've had some not so good teachers in your life, but hopefully you've had good teachers. And when you stop to think about it, you realize part of what made them a good teacher is they care about this stuff. And then they tell you why they care in ways that are compelling and make you care too. That's certainly my goal. And I want that to be your goal, because you become a teacher that day. So you've got to find something that is interesting to you and that's going to matter to others when you present it well. And part of the Devar Torah, again, it's not a book report. This isn't a canned thing of like what the Torah says or what it might mean. It's trying to touch people, to move them, to motivate them, to inspire, to educate. It's actually an amazing opportunity. You've got a captive audience of people who come starting with a deep reservoir of respect and excitement for your message. And you get to tell them anything. That's amazing. It does not happen very often in life. So enjoy it and make the most of it. So I'm going to end with an analogy in a minute, but first I just want to see, are there any penultimate, meaning right before the end, second to last, questions or comments? Going once, going twice. You know where to find me, because you can always ask them one-on-one. Okay, here we go. Analogy. Before, ancient humanity, we call them cavemen, right? Before we knew how to build houses, people lived in caves or anywhere convenient, right? So think about caves. Anyone been to a cave, Luria Caverns, been spelunking, right? So, there's these really funky geological formations deep in a cave, sticking down from the top and popping up from the bottom, and they are called, unmute. Go ahead, Zev.
Stalagmites and stalactites.
Okay, and it took me until my 30s to remember which is which. Stalactites with a C, remember C for ceiling. Stalagmites, G for ground. If you never knew that, now you know it. So stalactites, like icicle shapes from the top. And what is that in geology? If we had longer, we'd make this a geology lesson. But the basic idea is water falls as rain or snow, and it goes through the soil, and that is fresh water. That is yesterday's. It's like today's newspaper is yesterday's news, right? Well, today's rain drops that are falling on the ceiling in the cave is yesterday's rain. It is current events. And popping up from the bedrock, even though technically it's actually deposited by the little bits of mineral that are left in the water as it drops, but over time, this is now fused with the bedrock that is totally ancient. So in this analogy, we are living in the cave of Jewish life. And what is the bedrock of Jewish existence? What else? The Torah, right? So if in this analogy, the bedrock is the Torah, and popping up from it are all these stalagmites going like, ooh, I'm relevant, right? And then you've got the ceiling, which is like today, all the issues in the world, whether it's personal issues like sibling rivalry and middle school pressures and COVID, right? Or whether it's global stuff like COVID or climate change or gun violence or democracy or women's rights, or, right? There's so many things that we can focus on. And they're all up there at the ceiling. But sticking down from it are all of these stalactites saying, we need insight. We need support. We need better talking points, because we have not yet ended racism or climate change or childhood hunger. And so we need to be sustained in this. Root me in something ancient. And ancient is poking up saying, I want to be relevant today. Your goal is to find one good stalagmite, one interesting thing in the text, and then find one good stalactite, one important, relevant thing today. Now, if you could do time-lapse photography, like take one photo per year and then run it like a movie, right? Like 60,000 years in 60 seconds, and slowly these two would come closer and closer, and then they would touch, and as soon as they do, they'll fill out and become a massive column that seamlessly connects today with ancient, Torah and today. That's 60,000 years in geology. That's 6 minutes of your 800-word Devar Torah, where basically You start with these two ingredients, and the magic is in how you make them connect. And no, just like snowflakes, no two Divrei Torah are ever the same. This is your original contribution. So I bless you within your life, seamlessly connecting Torah and today, and finding ancient inspiration for the modern work that we have to do, and also being more deep and effective in the modern work we do by rooting it in something spiritual and communal and powerful and ancient. That's living Torah, and that's learning Torah. I bless you to go on and do both. Live in loin. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our evening. I thank you for your involvement and your attention. I bless you to keep thinking about it, keep talking about it, keep revisiting it. And I will stay on for any further questions or thoughts. But you are also welcome to say lehitraot.
Thank you, lehitraot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.